Lofi Poli Sci coming in a little different today. Michael Pickering here, playing one of our very own cuts titled For You. And that statement and that feeling you get from the music couldn't be truer. Everything we do it for you. And such is the Lofi Poli Sci way of things, and the we that we be. And today we have our 6th installment of our 9-part miniseries, Our World in Numbers. It's a Lofi Poli Sci original miniseries on development around the world, looking at top 10 lists of GDP, GDP per capita, HDI, and Gini. But we've done all of that, and last week we did our first list for the opposite end of the spectrum, with 10 countries with the lowest GDPs 2021. And today, we do 10 countries with the lowest GDP per capita 2021. And our data, just like last week, come from the IMF estimates of the year 2021 because the World Bank doesn't have any. Still. And a bit of a refresher for all of you lo-fi listeners out there, GDP per capita is when you take the GDP of a country, aka the gross domestic product, which is the accumulation of all goods and services produced in a country in one calendar year, measured in US dollars. Well, you take that number and divide it by the population. And that gives you GDP per capita, which is an average of what each person in the country would make if income was distributed perfectly equally to everyone. A nice fantasy indeed, which we already talked about how that's bullshit. So to the list we go. And coming in at number 10, Afghanistan, at $592 a person a year. And no, there's no mistake. $592 a person a year. We told you the other side of these lists would be different. Number 9, with a GDP per capita of $585 a person a year, is Yemen. Number 8, Malawi, with $566 a person a year. Number 7, Sierra Leone, $542 a person. Number 6, the Central African Republic, $526 a person. Now to our top 5. Number 5 is Madagascar, with a GDP per capita of $499 a person a year. Number 4, Mozambique, at $492. Number 3, Somalia, with $350 a person. Number 2, Burundi, at $261 a person a year. And coming in at number 1, the country with the lowest GDP per capita of 2021, South Sudan, at $230 a person a year. The newest country in the world, gaining independence in 2011, just 11 years ago, has the lowest GDP per capita in the world at $230 a person a year. And that's the list. So let's dig into it and then compare it to the top 10 countries list. So this list, out of all 6 lists of Our World in Numbers that we've done so far, is tied for the most geographically biased list we have. 8 of our 10 countries are African countries. In fact, the lowest 8 scores are African countries. In fact, if you add number 1 and number 2 together, South Sudan and Burundi, together you get $491, which means numbers 4 through 10 all have GDP per capitas more than doubled our combined number 1 and number 2. I mean, this list screams economic disparities and inequality. This list screams something's going down in Africa as far as GDP per capita. But hey, let's not go too fast, because Yemen and Afghanistan are not too far behind either. So let's see if we can look at all these countries, aside from being in Africa or near Africa. Is there something else going on that all these countries have in common? Question mark. And the answer is a hardcore absolutely yes. Almost every one of these countries are either still in the middle of, or have recently been in, or had an extremely long civil war or civil conflict. And many of them are still active conflict and war zones. Okay, next question. Well, how does conflict and war affect a country's economy? And that's a legitimate question to ask. And it's a pretty basic answer for you, too. It stops it. Then, it erodes it. War stops people from producing goods and services. And then the economy contracts, it shrinks, it gets smaller and smaller, and over an elongated period of war, like South Sudan and the two Sudanese civil wars that lasted for the better part of, 60 years almost. War and civil conflict completely destroy a country's economy. And remember, an economy is people. We aren't just measuring arbitrary numbers from arbitrary places. GDP and GDP per capita measure the strength and size of a country's marketplace. And a country's marketplace is quite literally, and I am not speaking figuratively or metaphorically here, the marketplace of a country, the economy of a country, is the real people who live there. Period. GDP is a measure of all goods and services produced by people. The people of a country. It's what people are doing in their lives in order to survive. In order to build a family, to send them to school, to send them to a doctor, to put food on the table and clothes on their back. And war? It takes away the medicine. It takes away the schools. It takes away the clothes, and it takes away the food. Yemen has suffered multiple man-made famines since 2015. Because of their civil war and people using food as a weapon to starve out resistance, and to starve out people. So you see, the bias that GDP per capita is picking up on in our list is some of the most war-torn countries in the world, with some of the longest lasting wars in the world. Although there are other cases too, like Madagascar on the list. We talked about them last week and how we'd be talking about them on this very list. Madagascar has the 5th lowest GDP per capita in the world in 2021, at $499 a person a year. They have some of the richest biodiversity in the world and massive potential for prosperity for the people. They don't suffer from the same legacy of war that South Sudan does, but they do suffer from a long-lasting legacy of political instability, infighting, and natural disasters. This past year alone, we've talked about massive Madagascar droughts multiple times. The droughts cause a lot of economic instability in the already fragile economy, and the economic instability leads to more political instability. And political instability and infighting leads to more economic instability. And then another drought hits. And then in 2021, you get a GDP per capita of just $499 a person a year. But look, honestly, we could go into all the details of all these countries and find just as many differences as there are similarities, no doubt. But what I want to do now with the rest of our time is compare this list, the 10 countries with the lowest GDP per capitas, to the 10 countries with the highest GDP per capitas 2021. Number 1 was Luxembourg, at $131,000 a person a year. Number 1 today is South Sudan, at $230. $131,000 compared to $230. Disparity? Inequality? Sure. Too obvious though, right? Well, let's look at number 10 then, which was Qatar, at $61,000 a person a year. Our number 10 today? Afghanistan, at $592 a person. 61,000 compared to 592. And get this, if we take all of our 10 countries today, add them together, we get $4,643. And 10 together, that is, compared to Qatar's 61,000. Now, right now, I bet you just may be saying, look, I get what you're saying, but these lists are just not comparable. My friends, have you met Lofi Poli Sci before? We'll do better than comparing apples and oranges. We'll compare apples to the planet Pluto because they're both spherical. I mean, for real. Here we are talking about countries with people in them on this planet Earth that all have governments ruled by people, and the disparity of income and economic inequality that exists globally between 7.75 billion people in the 200 or so countries will not be swept under the rug as just being not comparable. That's a trick. That's a sleight of hand. made for us, in fact, to separate us from them, to make us think in terms of us and them, to make us think that their lives aren't our lives. And we here at Lofi Poli Sci fundamentally reject that notion. We may not like seeing economic inequality between human beings on our planet, but we're not going to ignore it. We may not like seeing that this inequality is highly biased toward African countries, but we will recognize it, and we surely will ask, why is that the case? Aren't there wars in other places? And if not so many or as severe, then what is it about countries in Africa that make them appear so much on this list? And don't just think this is only these 8 of these 10. Oh, no. Go look on a list of GDP per capita by country, but by lowest GDP per capita to highest. And you tell me, Lo-Fi listeners, out of the 50 lowest GDP per capita countries, where are most of those countries located? And after you count, remember, there's only about 54 to 56 African countries, so keep that in mind. So what is it then? Why are so many of the poorest countries, as measured by GDP per capita, concentrated in Africa? And there is an answer. Several, really, but mostly they fall into one category. But I want you to think on this one for yourself. I want you to search within, deep, reach for it, discern. What is it? And we still have 2 more lists to go, looking at income inequality in countries as measured by the Gini Index, and looking at the Human Development Index, which measures income, education, and the health of a population. Our conversation continues. Our world in numbers continues. It's time for you to wake up and become part of that conversation. Always remember that Lofi Poli Sci is more than just me. It's the we that we be.